So I hope you guys find a lot of value in this conversation I had with Gwen Preston, the VP of Investor Relations at West Red Lake Gold Mines. We talked everything from her background to how she got to West Red Lake Gold Mines, their plans for production, and we talked about gold. So enjoy the conversation, guys, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Let's get into it. So today I'm joined by Gwen Preston, the VP of Investor Relations at West Red Lake Gold Mines, and we're going to talk about West Red Lake Gold Mines. We'll talk about gold a little bit, Gwen's background. So welcome to the show, Gwen. Introduce yourself, maybe tell us your background, how you got to West Red Lake Gold Mines, and we'll talk more.
That sounds good. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, I'm Gwen. I have been in the metals and mining investing world for longer than I might want to admit, 17 or 18 years. My background's technical chemistry and then journalism, so communications. I spent a bunch of years writing for a newspaper that was all about metals and mining around the world. That's where I learned the space. And then prior to joining West Red Lake, I spent 10 years as a newsletter writer. So kind of similar to what you do, Stas. I wrote a newsletter about what I was buying and selling in my portfolio in the metals and mining space, and people subscribed to that because
Mm.
I mean I did it because metals and mining are a somewhat complicated space, but when the opportunity shows up, when the metals moment arrives, there's a lot of people out there who realize that a little bit of insight from someone who has knowledge, a network, and puts the time in can be really helpful for their portfolio. So that's what I did for 10 years. And then only 6 months ago, I switched. I closed down that business so that I could join West Red Lake, which was one of the companies in my portfolio. Turns out they needed someone to help tell their story. And it was time for me. It was just the time for me to make a change. So I'm really excited to be here. I think it's an exciting moment for gold. And I think it's a pretty exciting moment for the company. So I'm glad to be here to talk about it.
That's awesome, Gwen. Yeah, that's cool to see that, we kind of have a similar background in a sense. I mean, I didn't study journaling. I'm sure you're a much better writer than me. But, I did start investing and kind of documenting my journey on social media online here, so that's pretty
Mhm.
cool. So
Yeah,
yeah,
for
you
sure.
talked about gold. Gold's in a bull market right now in the midst of raising rates, which is interesting, right? And now that the Fed's cutting rates, do you think that's going to send gold even higher? Kind of explain quickly to the audience how gold is at all-time highs when typically during rate hike cycles, that's not really the case, right?
Absolutely. I mean, gold should have done badly from 2021 to 2023. It should have done very badly. It was the most aggressive, rapid rate hike cycle in American history. And so gold should have really fallen off a cliff, and it didn't. It stayed strong through that period. So what happened there? It was China and India, to be blunt. And what's really interesting about that is that Chinese investors, the Chinese central bank, and individuals don't usually buy gold when its price is high. They have historically been bargain hunters. They love gold, but they buy it when the price is depressed. But they were buying it on the upswing consistently. And why were they doing that? Well, for the individual, it was because China has gone through in recent years a total paradigm shift, right? They had 20 years of explosive growth where investing in real estate, the stock market, and just interest rates did very well for investors. Then everything slowed down, as happens, and they've needed to, and all three of those locations for money aren't working anymore. And so there's been a significant shift in China of putting money in new places, and gold unsurprisingly, is one of the beneficiaries of that. Gold is a safe haven with upside. So gold individuals, you can search, past media stories. There's even been a craze of buying gold amongst young Chinese. Gold really became a thing for Chinese investors that, trading exploded on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. And then the People's Bank of China was also buying significant amounts of gold. And that's because everything from COVID through to the Russian invasion of Ukraine and other things, just the timing being right of the bilateral strength of Russia and China meant that these nebulous ideas of deglobalization and de-dollarization that had been around for a long time suddenly became very real. And so then China started buying a lot of gold. They're selling treasuries and buying gold. And for a while, they did that kind of secretly in a conventionally Chinese way. And then they started doing it a bit more publicly. And that's when it became really clear that the reason gold did so well when it should have fallen off a cliff is because of that. But what's really interesting is that those investors don't buy gold equities. They don't buy stocks. And so that's why we've ended up with this huge disconnect. So gold got kept
Right.
climbing to these all-time highs, but the stocks didn't reflect the price. And that's because it's Western investors who buy gold stocks. So that brings us up to the present. As you mentioned, we've now just entered a rate cut cycle, which is when Western investors classically look at gold. And Western investors ignored gold through that whole ascent because they didn't need to. They look for gold when they need some sort of diversification. Haven't needed it, buy the S&P, buy
Right.
Nvidia, do just fine, right? And so they,
Yeah.
they didn't need it. But now there's lots of reasons to look for diversification. There's this classic indicator to look to gold that is rate cuts. And but this is all happening when gold is already at all-time highs. So it's a really interesting moment for the price of gold. And I think it's a really interesting moment for gold stocks that are now starting to get interest from the investors who move gold stocks, which are Western investors. That was probably a longer answer than you expected,
No,
but
that
it's
was
hard to
great.
stop when I get started.
No, that was great because, my audience, they're into gold, but I feel like getting that type of macro perspective, maybe they haven't heard of that before. So that was really good insight there. Thank you. So let's transition now into West Red Lake Gold. You said you've been there for about 6 months. Kind of what's the opportunity there? I know the Madsen Mine, there's a lot of history there, so maybe we could talk about that and kind of just where you see things going over the next 6, 12, 18 months for the company. I know you're getting into production here by the middle of next year, so maybe some more insight there.
Absolutely. This is so we just talked about it being a pretty exciting moment for gold. West
Yeah.
Red Lake, it's also exciting for West Red Lake Gold Mine. So the company bought the Madsen Mine about 18 months ago. The Madsen Mine is in the western edge of Ontario, so sort of almost in the middle of Canada. It was a historic gold mine. I mean, Red Lake is a district in Canada that's famous for gold production. 30 million ounces have been pulled out of the rocks of Red Lake, really high grade ounces. These are narrow vein, high grade gold deposits. Madsen was one of those initial deposits. It ran from 1936 to 1972. The old timers did a great job. They mined down quite a few hundred meters. They also explored even deeper and they found a really cool extra high grade zone called the 8 zone. They drove a shaft all the way down to almost 1,300 meters to access that 8 zone. They mined it a bit. They pulled 2 million ounces out of Madsen from rock averaging 9 grams per ton, which is a very nice grade. But then it got expensive to keep a mine dewatered, and the price of gold in 1972 was not what you would want it to be for all those costs. And so the mine shuttered. And then there was a few ownerships here and there over the subsequent decades. But the one that matters is a company called Pure Gold. They bought the asset in 2014, and over the next 7 or 8 years, they did a lot of really good work. They did 180,000 meters, 180 kilometers of drilling to define the resource that we are relying on today. That's 1.7 million ounces of gold, indicated category, so reasonably good confidence category at an average grade of 7.4 grams per ton. So a really nice deposit. That's the main Madsen deposit as we know it today. And then Pure Gold, after defining it, they went ahead and started engineering a mine, permitting a mine, and building a mine, which is what you usually do. I'd say the misstep is that they largely stopped drilling when they started the mine engineering building process. And Red Lake Gold, I said it's narrow veins, it's high grade, but you need to do an immense amount of drilling to really pin down where the gold is in those veins if you want to mine successfully. And they didn't do that, what we call definition drilling. Their drill holes were still about 20 meters apart. We came in, so because their drill holes were too far apart and they didn't know accurately enough where the gold was, when they started mining, they were delivering material to the mill that was less than half the grade. They expected 8.5 grams. They were delivering like 3.5 grams.
Oh, wow.
Doesn't take, yeah, you don't need a degree in mining economics to understand that that's a major problem, right?
Right.
They also built the mine during COVID. There was a lot of obviously cost struggles because of that. There were some other capital projects, like projects to do ahead of operations that they didn't do because they just didn't have access to the money. That made for an inefficient mine in several ways. So then their costs were high. So costs high, low value material. And unfortunately, the mine went into the bankruptcy proceedings after only 14 months. That's when West Red Lake was able to step in and buy it from the senior secured lender, the guy who the group that had loaned them $150 million to buy this mine. So we bought it. So Pure Gold had invested $350 million in that 7-year period. We bought it from the senior
Wow.
secured lender for $6.5 million, plus a 1% royalty and a chunk of stock in our company. So very good deal. We
Yeah,
bought
that's
a
a great
mine.
deal. Great deal.
Oh, I mean, our CEO likes to say that it will be looked back upon as the deal of the decade. Um, so we bought a mine that was mostly built in a lot of the really important ways, permitted. The mill was really phenomenal, tailings facility in place, lots of underground infrastructure, like you can get down into the deposit. Um,
Right.
we bought it for almost nothing. That was 18 months ago, and we've spent that time addressing those missteps. So largely that's been a huge amount of that definition drilling. Their drill holes were 20 meters apart. Our drill holes before we mine an area are 6 meters apart. So we're
Got it.
really figuring out where the gold is. Then we're doing lots of proactive work, addressing those those higher costs, doing some of those projects that they didn't get to do because they didn't have access to the money. So doing things that underpin an efficient operation. So that's how we are addressing the two things that made Madsen fail only 2 years ago. And we are pushing to restart this mine, like you said, in the middle of next year because we want to produce gold into a market where we can sell it for $2,600 for our
Yeah.
investors.
Hopefully even more. I mean, at this point or
Mhm.
at this rate, gold could be $3,000 an ounce at some point, right? That's
It's
not too
absolutely
far-fetched.
possible. I mean, yeah, it's
Um,
not that far off from now, is it?
yeah, it's $400. That's not much. But yeah, that's great. I mean, you got a great asset for $6.5 million, where again, gold, Pure Gold put in 350 million. That's a crazy crazy good deal right there. So it's obviously very important to have all the infrastructure already built out, right? When you're getting into mining and getting gold out of the ground. That's a huge advantage for you guys, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the company came together because one of the really famous mining financiers and company builders in Canada, a man named Frank Giustra, got together with our president and CEO, whose name is Shane Williams. Shane has built mines all around the world. He has a 25-year career of leading the builds of mines in Greece, in Turkey, in Quebec. He previously worked for Rio Tinto so he's built a
Right,
lot of mines, deep mine building experience. Frank, incredible experience financing and building companies. So they came together because 2.5 years ago, they said, the gold market is going to go. We want to build a company to ride that market for our investors. And they believe and have seen in the data that the best way to give investors leverage to a rising gold market is through aggressive growth. So you want a company that is regularly increasing the amount of gold that they're producing. We're starting from zero, so putting Madsen into production is our first stage of aggressive growth. This is our foundational asset. And there's this concept of the golden runway, which is where you go from spending all the money that it takes to build a mine. We've spent a lot of money in the last year as we've prepared this mine for restart. But as you
right,
go from spending to making money by producing gold, that's a period that's coined the golden runway. And it's described as that because it's a period where share prices understandably re-rate. You should be worth more when you're producing than when you're only spending. And so we want to ride that re-rate for our investors with the Madsen mine. And then we want to acquire another asset and do it again. We want to grow this company aggressively in this market so that our investors get leverage to the price of gold. So that first re-rate is what we're gunning for our investors over the next 18 months, right? We're basically slowly going to start this mine up. We're test mining right now. We'd like to start the mill up in the first quarter of next year. We're about to issue the official mine plan that will come out in the next few weeks. We're about to access the last chunk of capital. We're really pushing to access the last piece of money that we need to fund ourselves fully all the way through to commercial production. A lot of pieces are about to line up to demonstrate to the market that we're really close to production. And the market doesn't really understand, I think, how close to production we are, because this isn't a normal project. We didn't buy a project that was a deposit and then go through all the sort of usual sequential steps to put it into production. We bought a mine that was already built and permitted, but that needed some work. And we got money from the market, not from a debt facility. And we just started doing the work. And now we're about to define our mine plan, but actually we're right around the corner from production. It's an unusual order. And I think we're about to explain to the market through through the catalysts that are coming in the next little
Right.
while that we're actually nigh on production. It's around the corner. And there's very few new gold mines going into production in 2025, especially from smaller companies. And it's smaller companies with new production that create the biggest upside opportunity for investors. So you can tell I'm excited. I mean, we as a group are very excited to get this thing into production because we just see such opportunity because of that rarity of new production, the ability that the fact that this asset lets us get to production quickly because it's mostly built and permitted. And to do that for our investors, we're really excited.
That's very exciting. Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine. So the idea is to get the Madsen mine up and running, start pulling gold out of the ground, then go to another location, right? Is what you're saying, pretty much. Prove the Madsen mine, then maybe acquire something else.
That is the vision for sure. I mean, that's a vision at this point. We do not have another asset. We're
Right.
actively looking for what we might acquire next. And there's not another Madsen out there, but there's mines that haven't gotten the attention that they deserve because they ended up in the portfolio of a big mining company that focused on their biggest mines and maybe didn't pay attention to their smaller mines. So they often divest those operations. There's other projects out there that maybe hit against some stumbles along the way in a Madsen-esque style. Those are the kinds of assets that we are likely to target because we're a team that knows how to build mines. Led by Shane, he attracted a group of people with really deep mine building experience, which is unfortunately a bit rare in mining. Such a cyclical industry means that expertise is thinner than you would want it to be. People leave in these long bear markets. New people don't start because they know that, by the time they're done their mining engineering degree, you could be in a bear market without a job for 5 years. So expertise is a little thin in the space, but that was foundational to Shane's build of this company is making sure that we have real experience building mines. So we want to go out there. I mean, maybe it's a cheesy way to say it, but let's go out and be the fix it team. Let's go out and find assets where we can apply that expertise and our access to capital because of the group that we're connected to. And let's make good on these assets that have opportunity, but that haven't had the chance to make good on it.
Yeah, that's really important to be ran by a good management team. And Frank Justra, of course. Is there any other, insight from Frank or just what kind of how important is his role to the team? And we'll slowly wrap up, maybe some closing thoughts. Just kind of where you see West Red Lake going in the short term and over the long term. I mean, it's important again to have a strong management team, and being led by Frank is pretty big as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think if you look at the short and the long term, there are different investment theses for those. So you can buy West Red Lake now and have sort of an 18-month perspective on that purchase. And that's the first re-rate as we put Madsen into production.
Right.
Get several months of commercial production under our belt. The market's like, you did it, and gives that full re-rate for being a gold producer. That's sort of the short-term investment thesis. The longer-term thesis is based in the fact that Frank Justra, in particular, doesn't build single asset companies. If you look in his past, none of the miners that he built, they started with one asset.
Right.
Every good mining company starts with one good mine, but none of them stopped there. And so Frank's role in the company, he absolutely wants to be kept up to speed on everything that we are doing at Madsen. But his is more on the what's out there, what's the next step, how would we structure the next step, how would we fund the next step, how would we that's where his value just is unbelievable. The connections that he has, the ideas that he has for how to structure deals. So he's very deeply involved on that front for sure. And it's his involvement and then Shane's vision. I mean, he's also very dedicated to this concept of becoming a mid-tier gold producer, producing whatever it is, 500,000 ounces of gold a year. by, in 5 years, in 7 years, in that sort of time frame. That's aggressive, but we actually have the capacity to do that because of who we are and who we work with. So those are the two sort of investment theses, the two timelines for West Red Lake. And we are actively working on both of them. We're working really hard to put Madsen into production. And we're also always looking. We've tried to acquire additional assets already. Those haven't worked out. That's the way the game goes. But we're absolutely working on both of those fronts at the same time. So if you think that we're in a gold market that's going to last for a while, which I do, and people have their own perspectives, but I think we have many years of good gold in front of us, then we have an investment thesis that fits that. But we also have a shorter term one because investors like to also make money in the short term.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, short term, long term. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much everything I had on my end. We covered, all the questions I had written down. You actually covered a lot of them without me even asking, which is great. You did a great job, Gwen. But yeah, I
Thanks.
appreciate, your time learning more about, your career, West Red Lake Gold Mines. It's been a great time. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me. I love talking about gold. I love talking about mining. So I appreciate the opportunity.